Welcome to Altar of the Demo Gods. If you're wondering what advice from two experienced sales engineers sounds like, it's a little like this.
Welcome back to Altar of the Demo Gods. I'm Keith Wilson, joined by my co-host, John Morton. John, how you doing tonight?
I am happy to be alive, Keith. Happy to be alive.
Happy. Well, you had an interesting story. I'll let you get to it in a minute, but today you're happy to be alive.
Yes, I am.
So you'd actually texted me, I think it was last week or last weekend, because John has one of those awesome pickup trucks, right? The Ford, what is it called? It's the new Lightning.
F-150 Lightning.
Yeah, it's the new F-150 Lightning, the electric Ford Lightning. And you were driving it to the middle of nowhere.
Oh yeah, a EV desert, as they like to call it, in a little town in Wyoming where I have a vacation home I had to go check on. And needless to say, that certain states are not very EV friendly.
I brought up that story with my wife, and she's like, "Well, it's Wyoming. What the hell did you expect?"
John, why don't you introduce that voice that our audio only listeners are hearing, so they can know who he is.
Absolutely. Looking forward to having our guest on tonight, Eric Mueller, who many may remember from previous podcasts. Interesting thing about Eric, he started as an SE around the same time I did, working for a small startup, came from the practitioner space as a cybersecurity individual. Some of Eric's accolades I like to brag about is, when we went to DEF CON a few times, the cybersecurity conference, Eric actually is I say this with pride, maybe it's not accurate, but a social engineering champion, part of their competitions there. And he's also been confused most recently as Santa Claus by young children. So imposter syndrome probably sets in there with that level of standard. So welcome, Eric.
Thank you. And I'm proud of that imposter syndrome. As with regards to the DEF CON SECTF, I am a proud 5-time loser. But the biggest reason for that was I was told at one point back in the day that if you won, you weren't able to play the game again. It's like, well, why the hell would I want to actually win if I don't get to play anymore? They've changed the rules since, but hey, that's just what happens.
I love it, man. So, and thank your wife, by the way, for saying, what did I expect from Wyoming? You're absolutely correct. I am an early adopter of many things, and an EV in Wyoming is, this is oil country, son, was kind of the response I got. So you're right, Keith. Not the best experience.
And you illustrated the story perfectly with pictures to go along with the steps of it. Every sad, disappointing moment of the charger, the charge on the vehicle going down to nothing, to the tow truck coming, to you plugging in at a charging station just enough to get somewhere from that tow truck, from that station to your house to plug it in. It was a harrowing story, and that is the topic that we're talking about tonight. Is storytelling and narratives and how important that is to sales and being an SE.
And if you haven't seen the photos, you will see them in a meme eventually, which ties into the rest of the story as well.
Absolutely.
So storytelling is important because, and I read this, I wish I had the book. I'll have to look it up. I read a book at some point that was about storytelling, and I did it specifically when I was a new SE. But I remember from the book it talking about, God, I'm going to have to look this up now because it's really bugging me. But I remember from the book it talking about how storytelling and being able to understand a story is important to us as humans through evolution, right? Many, many years ago, we needed to be looking at tracks in the snow and decipher a story from that. What type of tracks are those, and which way are they going? Are they tiger tracks headed towards me, or are they deer tracks headed away from me, and I'm trying to track that down? So we needed to be able to understand stories as humans to stay alive, and that's been ingrained with us psychologically and evolutionarily ever since then. So that to me is at the core of why storytelling is so important to sales, right? Now, what I want to understand from you guys is how you're interweaving your ability to tell stories into sales. Let's start with, or being a sales engineer, I should say. Now, let's start with the demo where the SE begins to tell the story generally.
Yeah, man. So I'll kind of kick it off here. So one of the worst things I'll see when I interview anyone in a technical sales role is all they talk about is features. Look at this cool feature. APT 42 used tool XYZ. We brought this up earlier. It was a point of contention. Now, what makes a better story, what makes an engaged listener is when you can weave that into something that makes sense relative to whatever it is you may happen to be selling, right? So it's always like, I'd say over the past 10 years of doing this sort of role, what I found most successful is use cases that associate whatever you're selling to the problem that this person you're engaging with might have, even if it's as simple as how it relates to you directly when you used to be a defender. That goes a long way, and I'm pretty sure Eric, you could double down on that. But when I would tell folks I used to be a defender, I used to sit in your seat, I used to do these things. It's kind of like telling a story, right? And I would weave in how I wish I had a tool or a tech or knowledge or something that would help me.
Yeah, I would double down and go a little further, even in the sense that on one hand, yeah, you want to associate them, you want to connect with them, but also anything that they've said up until the point where you're giving the demo. One of my biggest pet peeves is the meeting where you're showing up first call, and it's and your rep says, "Hey, let's go ahead and do a demo while we're here," because at that point you don't know enough about them to be able to tell the story. You don't know enough about them to hook it in, and
you don't. Yeah, I was going to say you don't know enough about them to tell an interesting story, and yeah. I think that's where you were headed with that.
Well, yeah, and I was just asking you too, as far as like you were just saying about moments ago about having read a book a while ago about the importance of telling a story and how that led to the evolution, weaved into the evolution of history. Was that book by any chance Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel?
No, it was not.
Damn it. Okay, so that would have made a great book. That would have tied into the demo.
Eric was trying to tell a story
as we were moving through. And it helped lead them in there because you have to make it relevant. Because if they don't care, it doesn't matter. Why are we here? Because what's a big part of what we're doing is to associate what we sell with the emotion that connects them to say, you know what, I want to buy from these people. Get them to care about what you're going to show them. Otherwise, 100%. Just send them a damn slideshow.
And the easiest emotion to hook into is the problem, right? So if you can tell the story from the point of view of the problem, I put myself in your shoes, right? You've told me these are the problems you're having. So let's have a day in your life. We're sitting down and you're having this problem. Okay. Now you experience that problem with our tool. Now I'm sitting down as you. I experience that problem. I use this tool to solve that problem. And emotionally, you've hooked me, right? That's interesting because you're solving a pain and you're putting it in my head of, okay, this is how I'm going to use this data. You're painting a picture. You're telling a story for me that's making me feel safer and safer with this purchase.
How much easier will your life be if you're in this beautiful car?
Oh, yeah, or even just basic communication. You guys know I used to be a sailor all the time, and every great submarine story, I'm going to edit this statement. But we would always start it this way to at least catch someone's attention too. In the modern age, post-COVID, where you can come to a meeting, camera off, completely be disengaged. God only knows what you're doing on the other end of this meeting where I want your attention. We always used to kick off, submarine stories with, so there I was, off the coast of Kansas, elbow deep in a chicken. Instantly, people start thinking, well, why is a submarine off the coast of triple landlocked Kansas? And what are you doing with your elbow deep into a chicken? So kind of weaving a story is a good way to get someone's interest and attention as well, right?
Right. Well, there's ways to start it. You mentioned that's a technique, right? Is starting a story with a hook like that, with an interesting hook. I walked in and there the body was on the floor. Okay. What's next?
Yeah.
You hook me with sentence 1, I'm on board for sentence 2, because you have to earn that, right, as you go. That's another thing too. You got to set the hook, but you got to keep that hook in there. Yeah. And if you don't understand the customer's story, if you don't understand the story that you're telling and how to make it compelling to that customer, you're going to lose them.
Yeah, I go back to the communication 101 too, right? I tell everybody, I'm not Tom Brady. I don't roll into a bar and the first thing that gets people's attention is my looks. It's always there I was off the coast of Kansas, elbow deep in a chicken.
Trying so hard not to make stories, bring up comments that require other backstories.
But that's the key, right? It's enticing. People lean in. They want to share their own. They want to talk to you. They want to engage. I think that's the art of storytelling, right? People want to actively listen to what you're saying. They might even turn their camera on to show their facial expressions. That's when you know you're winning in a meeting like that.
Yeah, I mean, and there's other techniques as well too, right? You talked about one, setting the hook. Another one that you talk about a lot, we haven't brought it up explicitly, but it's speaking simply in terms of metaphors or analogies or even personal anecdotes, bringing those in, telling your story that way. And John, you've brought up plenty of you say it on probably every episode where, speak plainly, talk to me like I'm 5, explain this to me very simply. That needs to be a part of your story as well. So yeah. I'm curious, are you guys practicing what we're talking about here?
Yeah. What would you say, Eric? Do you like to come in? Now there is a time and place for coming over the top with like the advanced details of something maybe very technical, but what do you think?
My favorite technique is to find that where the hell did you think of an anecdote and be able to deliver it at just the pitch perfect time. It's like, well, if you were a seahorse in 1947, that'd be absolutely perfect. And then you have a story about being a seahorse in 1947, or, it's something to the effect of, well, it's not like the reason why we all square danced in high school. And then you just drop that on the floor and walk away from it. And if somebody wants to know why, it's because Henry Ford was a racist. There's
all right, you've got me for sentence 3.
Yeah, see, exactly. Actually, there's a whole story behind it. But yeah, you find the little anecdotes that are tight that you just drop in, and somebody's like, you know what? I've never heard it quite described. And sometimes it's the simple ones. Not that long ago, I was asked to do a comparison of enterprise detection and response products. And I was able, in the talking about the various vendors in the market, just referring to a previous employer of mine as an absolute dumpster fire. It's more of an analogy than it is an anecdote, but it was enough to take somebody off guard that he actually said that in a meeting with a client. It got a laugh. It was completely accurate. Some of you guys are going to know exactly what I'm talking about. And, but it opens the eyes. So I think sometimes just the right, and that's nothing you can practice. That's just about, having your wits about you, thinking actively about trying to make that entertaining little quip and hooking them in quick.
Yeah, that's where I learned what a parable is too. For the longest time, I kept thinking they were a different word, but they're parables. One that Eric always gets me with, and I actually never forgot, was this ending of a comment. You have a quick quip about explaining something quickly, right? Explaining something simply. And Eric,
try saying that 5 times fast. A quick quip of quickly.
Quickly.
Eric would always say, and Bob's your uncle. And I'm like, I don't know what the hell that means. But to this day, now I use it all. And Bob's your uncle.
And Bob's your uncle. Yeah, you're
Uncle Rob.
I'm surprised you didn't get that more when you were overseas, John. But no, it's an easy
one. Yeah, well, I didn't know. But yeah, parable too. That should be our word of the day, Keith.
Well, I guess that's something new because we've always done acronym. We've done acronyms. We don't necessarily have a word.
Maybe we will find an acronym throughout the
course. You get back to those like classic cartoons that were like around Tennessee Tuxedo times, where they talked about the old Roman parables. What's the big one? The scorpion and the tortoise. some of those other ones. Every now and then you can find a way to bring one of those in, and you bring it at the right time. It's going to bring somebody back to a cartoon they watched in the lunch hour when they were 5. I mean, if they're gray hair, otherwise it'll completely go over their head. In which case, you just say, "Well, talk to your parents."
Yeah, so this is why you need to have your demo and your technical presentation down pat, right? You like that just needs to be muscle memory that you can rehearse like it's your band's greatest hits, so that you can throw in those audibles, the parables, the analogies, the metaphors that you also have libraries of in your back pocket. That's where this job gets complicated, right? Because the people that are good at this job, they can take all those different elements, and we can take this beyond that first technical presentation and the demo and POCs, right? Think about the storytelling that we do in a closing meeting after a POC when we're trying to score that technical win, right? Here's the story of what happened. Not my product did this, and this. That's not interesting. Yeah. Here's what we did, and here's how we think it's going to make your life better.
Even outside of software, while I was sitting there in the whipping winds of Wyoming, I like those very complex sentences that no one can repeat fast. In the whipping winds of Wyoming, just
the
wet
alliteration.
And insufferable.
It's very Robert Frost of you. Yeah.
Trying to charge my truck when I saw this ABB DC CCS charger. That all actually means something in technical sales. I thought to myself, isn't it great that this thing was here? Shouldn't somebody buy more of these and put them every 10 miles, 50 miles, 100 miles? Right? So I have a story to tell about the pain I felt suffering through trying to charge my EV truck. Finding a charger. You can go around and pitch these, charging stations, all by telling this terrible tale that related to my pain and suffering, but it's an association to what we're talking about, Keith. Whether it's
let's do a quick sidebar on that too, because I want to associate that back to sales, because you just talked about you were in pain and suffering. How much money were you willing to spend to end that pain and suffering?
Dude, I honestly, the first thing I did was I was like, I need to figure out how to call a tow truck, and I don't care what it costs. Honestly.
Yeah, because the emotions you're feeling at the time are, I want this to end. I want to be comfortable, and I am not comfortable right now.
And then the next thing he did was spend 5 times the amount that, making the investment in the potential growth of an industry that would solve that problem.
Well, I checked my Ford insurance first, and they actually approved it. But I was willing to pay, is the point.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah.
I was more than willing to pay to end that suffering. And the first question I asked about timeline was, I was like, well, how long until the tow truck gets here? Literally. And they were like, we will be there in roughly 30 minutes. It was like the greatest moment I ever had in my life, because they solved my problem and they promised me something which was fast. I expected hours of darkness, pain, and wind. It did not happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now were there people laughing at the gas generator charging up your car?
The tow truck driver did make that joke of, and again, he was selling himself. He's like, if you just subscribe to AAA, you could have saved some money. And I'm like, I got this for free. He's like, I should just put a generator in the back of my truck that has a, electric plug-in where I could have charged your truck. And I'm laughing, and I'm like, opportunity to sell generators. So the whole time I'm thinking through it about that. I was being relatively calm, but absolutely, they were like, man, gas rules the world. Okay, for now.
So John's got a story to tell now when he goes to sell electric vehicles.
I absolutely do. Normally I talk about the features, but now
risk management. There's a few other places you could apply that too.
Oh, insurance, all the things.
So I'm a little curious, Eric, on the social engineering aspect of it, because you do have so much experience with social engineering in security. So for those that are listening to this podcast that aren't security folks, social engineering is just a fancy word of saying lying to get whatever information you need to get something done. That's
a little more nuanced. I would say something closer to convincing somebody to do something that isn't necessarily in their best interests.
The scorpion and
sometimes taking some liberties with the truth. So lying. But but beyond that,
Yeah. Well, like, you know, we like to explain it like we're five sometimes on the podcast.
Yeah.
So that's, you know,
But
that's the explain it like it's like you're five is.
But I think relevant to this discussion, there's at least one big point that I want to make sure we threw in there that all of us are subject to, or part of that art, you know, and it's you know, you hear about people that talk their way into buildings and, you know, are able to, you know, convince themselves, you know, all manners of things and convince anybody else to do anything that they want. And these things aren't that tough. But when it comes to the conversational elements of it, there's one big one that I think a lot of people in sales have a challenge with. And it's something that's in social engineering speak, it's referred to as the principle of ego suppression. And the idea of the principle is that you have to acknowledge in a conversation that when you hear a story, when you hear somebody else tell a story, there may be negative benefit to you offering your counter story. And this is something we've all experienced where, you know, if I'm talking, you know, this will happen to anybody that ever talks to John, where you're talking to him and he's like, oh, well, let me tell you about the time that this happened to me. And he's going to one-up you with a nuclear bomb, all right? And if you're in a sales conversation and somebody says, oh, I remember once I was in a capture the flag competition and I did this and this and this, and it was really cool. The principle of ego suppression is what we have to hold on to, saying, you know what? I was in a similar conversation and I absolutely aced that thing. But if I share that story now, it makes the person I'm talking to feel like they've accomplished less.
Beautiful, genius, simplicity.
Which has absolutely nothing to do with your goal. Your goal is to make them, is to help them feel in a better place, to feel like you're a peer, not that you're better than them. And that's something where we've talked some in the past about, you know, with sales engineers in particular, there are people that are lowercase s, capital E, where they've got all the engineering and not a whole lot of the sales. That's one of the bigger distinguishers, is those that haven't mastered that ability to hold back on the storytelling,
yep.
as opposed to throw it all out there, because there's a right time and the right place. And those stories are perfectly fine to share if you're out, you know, in an after work event. But when you're in, so often we find ourselves time constrained.
Yeah.
And when you're in those time constraint, you know, periods, no, your goal is the wrong time to share those things.
Absolutely. Jesus, Eric, I'm over here smirking ear to ear because I got this story that will top. No, that was a joke. No, honestly, 100% is suppressing that, right? That ego and letting them talk, because they're going to volunteer so much more information. And just to add a little bit to that, I'd say 10% of the time, is it a good story? It's not like we're sitting here listening to a customer tell us an absolutely gut-busting, amazing story.
Yeah.
That's the hardest part.
Yeah.
I want to, Keith wants to, Eric wants to, we want to liven it up. We want to be like, hey man, that's a great story, you know, add a little more flair. But you're right.
It
the
turned
best
out
sellers,
his friend was a dog, and I would have never thought it was a dog.
and meanwhile, the right answer is, well, tell me more about that dog, sir.
Exactly.
Or ma'am. Or,
I mean,
you know.
that's one of the easiest ways to make friends, right? Is to ask questions of them and keep your mouth shut. It's also a great tool for social engineers because people love to talk about themselves.
And is it being disingenuous to just kind of encourage their ego? I don't think so. I mean, you're in sales. Get used to it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole ethical, moral discussion to be had around manipulation.
I'm sorry, you
right?
used two words there.
That you're not familiar with.
Yeah, okay.
I have annual training around both.
Yeah.
But
yeah, so let's go ahead and do some key takeaways from this that people should walk away. What I'm gonna give mine, and then we'll go to Eric, and then we'll go to John about key takeaways that you think that people need to leave this conversation knowing. Mine is storytelling is ingrained in us, or it's ingrained in us to want to listen to stories. It's part of evolution to listen to stories because they're interesting. So wrap whatever you're selling around a story. Whatever your pitch is, you need to add a story to flow it through. to hook somebody's attention because you're tapping into our squirrel brain, whatever's, still there that we have no control over. So focus on that. So Eric, what do you want people to walk away from this episode knowing?
I say, do what you can to practice your storytelling abilities, as well as you practice your ability to restrain them at the same time. Keep them tight. And if you're looking for anecdotes and things like that to add in, a great jump starter would be, say, Bartlett's Book of Familiar Quotations. Those along lines where people have, or any of the works of Mark Twain, places where they've done an amazing job getting a tight amount of wit in just a single sentence. The more of those you can have at your disposal, the better off you're going to be.
Yes, awesome. John, what about you?
I'm a huge fan of the story sandwich. I like that nice tight intro and that nice tight ending. Everything else that's filler in between, you can kind of play it by ear, but to Eric's point, absolutely, you got to practice it. And if you've ever heard a great story, everybody, Keith and Eric, will be guilty of this, and I recommend it. If I've ever told a great story and you want to use it, go ahead and steal it. I mean, modify it a little and give, reference. But
do you know how many times I bumped into Matthew McConaughey in the bathroom?
True story. Matthew McConaughey in the basement in San Francisco. J.W. Marriott. See? So that's my advice. Story sandwich.
Yes. Okay. Story sandwich. All right. Yeah. Great episode, guys. In the next episode, we're going to be talking about understanding customer use cases and product alignment. If you've enjoyed this episode, you can get more of us, all things Altar of the Demo Gods, by going to demogodspod.com. If you have questions for us or have show ideas, you can email us at demogodspod@gmail.com. Eric, John, anything you guys want to promote?
Nothing in particular. Just be good to each other.
Be good to each other. All right, we'll see you next week on Altar of the Demo Gods.